I thought I just got that.
Telepathic.
Seriously, it's like reading my mind. It's like artificial intelligence.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. This is Thursday, May 4th, and it's the Town Council Finance Committee workshop. We are going to be reviewing the school department budget today, so we have a number of guests with us joining us to help us understand those details. I'm going to call this meeting to order and note that we have a full committee present. Councilor Shoup and Hamel are joining me. We do have an item to approve the minutes from our April 26, 2023 meeting. Do we have a motion? Anybody? Motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
The second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Changes? Okay. All those in favor? That passes. And now we're to the heart of the meeting, which is, I think we're going to start with a presentation from the school department. Some of it was covered, a lot of it was covered last night, so we may move quickly, and then we'll have an open Q&A and dialogue, get into some of the details of the budget and where we are. So I don't know who's going to be, Liam, are you driving the, okay.
Are you? I feel like, as you mentioned, John, we covered a lot of these initial slides, the same information last night, but just a quick recap. And then I'll have, and Kate can go through some additional slides, and we also have a few questions as well. So just start there. So again, just to reiterate from last night, we've had some changes since first reading, but in terms of our priorities for the next fiscal year, in terms of the needs of the school department and our priorities, those have remained the same. Again, this is very much a needs-based budget and focusing on meeting the needs of our changing and evolving population of students. So we're super focused on meeting the needs of our kids with special needs and on IEPs. We're super focused on literacy, increased literacy support at all levels, early literacy, and some of the assessments post-pandemic and through the pandemic, and really catching kids up on their skills as we go through. And then we're also looking at implementing social emotional learning at all levels, K through 12. That's been a strategic goal of the district now for a couple of years. And then again, focused on, as we go through, meeting our facilities needs in the K-8 strategic project as well. So those key priorities going into this upcoming year have not changed. You get to you wanna do this slide?
Are you bored?
This is your favorite one. No, I keep giving you
You give me the
handoff on your favorite slide.
Yeah, so the next couple of slides just call out some of the big pieces of the school budget process, really. And we mentioned this last night, that part of our school budget process is to go through every single line item with the building leaders who are responsible for those, or the department heads who are responsible for those. And I do like the slide because it is a culmination of that process, and an acknowledgement that building a school budget doesn't simply involve taking this year's budget and adding some money to it and turning it around to next year. So I do like this.
Could I ask just for one request for future? When we have numbers like this on a slide, could you please total them? It's 250. I come up with 250, 251. So that is just a small thing.
Impressive.
Well, just hang on, they're going to get better. I guarantee it.
All right, well, I'm not sure that we're going to test Liam to add the next slide, but let's see how it goes. Right? So in this particular slide, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take a step aside here, my first off topic of many. We have a lot of detail underlying these slides that is available to the public. Of course, we have the town budget portal, but we also have a school budget page on our website. And one of the last slides in this deck has a link to that. And there's just so much material out there. So, to Don's point, well, we've got these added positions. This slide shows the FTEs, but it doesn't show the cost. And in that detail, you'll find the costs broken out, what different bargaining units we have, what the FTEs are, what the class size projections are. All of those kinds of things are behind this information. So this slide talks about some of the things that Jeff referenced in that first slide. What are our targets? What are our goals in adding funding to our budget? This first goal is to retain some of the positions that we've had in this current fiscal year that have been funded through the ESSER grant, which is the latest of the many COVID-related. Yeah, sure. We can go fast, right?
Sure.
We all know this stuff by heart now. The additional added funding in the FY24 budget, as Jeff pointed out, these are the same things that we talked about as our priorities in that first slide, that we're talking about adding staff members and services to meet the needs of certain specific groups in our district, kids with particular needs that we're recognizing, and that we realize that we need additional resources to serve those needs.
You know, we heard some of this from last night too. I mean, we have had a significant increase in referrals to special education. I think some of it is, you know, a lot of districts are experiencing this, you know, as part of and through the pandemic, but also I think deservedly so. Scarborough has a reputation for having super high quality schools and super high quality special education programs. So people will move here for that reason. That being said, the costs associated with educating our special education students is significantly higher than it is for general ed students. And that was part of, we talked about that, we touched on that a little bit last night with the graph that kind of provides some comparisons for people expenditure.
When you have people with disabilities that you're providing services for, do you get any sort of state funding?
We do. So
What part of?
that's part of the formula.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know how many hours it would take to really explain the EPS formula that the state uses to determine your subsidy, but that is definitely a factor.
Right. So when we were talking last night and Chris was saying, you know, we have like up to 40 kids coming in, how does that factor in? That doesn't factor in now, does it?
No, actually,
No.
it's going to be a delayed reaction, right?
Right.
Because the state is going to be looking at our actual expenditures for FY24 subsidy. They're looking at our actual expenditures in FY22, because that's the last year that's
Right.
finished. So you're right, it would take some time for that to catch up. One of the things about special education costs is that they are a determining factor in subsidy, general purpose aid for minimum receivers, which means communities who are so wealthy as determined by that formula that they would normally not receive subsidy at all from the state have to receive a percentage of their special education costs under statute. So there is still a little bit of money coming in, and it's directly tied to this.
What's EPS stand for?
Oh, Lord.
Essential program and services.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm terrible with acronyms.
Earnings per share,
About
where I
700.
come from, so I'm glad that I asked.
Earnings per share. Oh, we should start investing. The schools are just so terrible with acronyms. It's the worst. But that's the EPS is the label, Don, for that big formula that the state education department uses to determine what a school department, running the school department should cost. John, I think John reinvented EPS one year. Didn't you?
I think the EPS is pretty good, but how they figure out how much you should pay is
It's the-
pretty
right,
bad.
it's,
Yeah,
the formula is great till you get to that bottom line.
yeah,
It's
it kind
too
of
much.
creates a cliff that we were on a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
I noticed that your special ed out of district, I think it's called out of district,
Out of
or
district
that's
tuition.
gone up quite a bit. Is that because some special cases that we have, or is
Yeah,
it?
and, you know, without talking out of turn in terms of confidentiality, those numbers are based on actual kids in our district. And out of district placement is a tool that's used for students who cannot access education in our own district because of whatever disability they may have. It's just too severe or intense to enable us to serve that child's needs within the district. And there are specialized private schools who can serve those needs for those children. And if your child lives in your community, then it's the responsibility of the school where they would be enrolled to send those children to private schools. And so when you look at those numbers, they will vary year over year. And one piece of that formula is the cost of the private schools, and that's set. The tuition they can charge is set by the state each year. And then the other side of the formula is how many students do you have and what schools do they go to? And so we actually use the actual situation that we're in this year and an anticipated amount for students that we know that might be joining us.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Pretty specific. All right.
Sorry for the
so-
distraction, guys.
Yes.
No, this is actually great. It's like, it's better to dive in as we go along, I think. All right, so yeah, this is basically just the detail as to what the ask is to meet those needs that we were talking about in the very first.
Right, and so the focus is, you know, special education services and students and supporting the needs of students as written into their IEPs. So that's the first bullet. And then focusing on our English language learners. As I mentioned, the numbers have increased. Those that are designated, we added about 30%, I think, somewhere in there, increase over last year, just in this year alone. And then increasing our literacy support and addressing learning gaps, specifically with an additional resource room teacher at the middle school, and then increased literacy support at Wentworth, as well as a K-2 speech pathologist to handle. Basically, this is going from a part-time position now to full-time to address services for kids K-2.
And one of the things you may hear us talk about is that we talk a lot and have talked a lot in the last couple of years about the increasing needs of students. And one of the things that we've noticed is that or that we believe is that some of the additional referrals to special education services may have something to do with the fact that we don't really have a very solid intermediate tier of interventions for kids. And so what we're hopeful with some of the literacy support staffing and reworking that a little bit is that we may have students who just need a little bit of academic support piece. And, you know, if we can bolster the services that they're receiving in a gen ed classroom, general education classroom, and then have a little bit of literacy support, we may not have quite as many kids who actually are falling behind enough to qualify for special services. So it kind of takes that pressure and pushes it back towards general education. We can go next, yeah. So this slide, I think you've heard about this from two different sides. And one of the things that we're really proud of, I'm really proud of as a citizen of Scarborough, is that we really do a great job sharing. The school department, the town, we have so many great partnerships. We have partnerships with, obviously, with community services. We have partnerships with public safety. We have partnerships with public works. Probably one of my best friends in the world is Ed Alden, who takes care of all of our buses and makes my life so easy. You know, those are things that, you know, you don't really see on the surface, and they're so valuable to this town because everyone's taking ownership of the same properties and services. So this is an effort, I think we touched on this last night, for the school department and community services to work together to make sure that everybody's needs are being met and that we're acknowledging the work that we're doing for one another.
So help explain this to me? So I've heard this story about us bringing in the groundskeeping in-house by staffing it up. So why is this in your budget and in community services budget? Shouldn't it be one or the other? No, I don't really understand that.
That's a good question, Don. It's one that I think John has raised a few times because it appears to be a duplication. But the way that we have been managing shared services arrangements with the town is that the town will budget for their personnel, let's say in this case, and the school department will pay revenue to the town for that personnel. So you're right, there's an expenditure in both budgets. There's an offsetting revenue in the town's budget. And one of the values of, from my perspective, one of the values of actually showing that expenditure on the school side as well is that then that folds into our operating costs and also adds to our subsidy. If, we're looking at our facilities costs and our facilities costs include this work that's being done by a town employee or our IT costs or our bus repair costs, then those costs are actually to some extent reimbursable by the state.
Councilor Hamel, in order to equalize things, the budget order you passed last evening takes out all so-called intergovernmental revenues. And so the gross budget you approved is actually reflective of the gross budget, backs those numbers out.
And this is an allocation back to,
Yeah, I mean, this is really an attempt to, one, acknowledge and recognize where services are rendered and who's responsible for that cost. Someone needs to have that employee and show that expense. So I think the way we've dealt with it, it's not perfect or elegant, but it's to back those out of the total gross spending that you approve.
Yeah, I didn't dive into that. I probably should have, but so if you add up the components of spending that we authorized at first reading, that number is bigger than the overall number that we authorized. And the overall number was reduced for things like this is
That are-
one of them, MIS,
They're doubly.
fuel and
Vehicle
public works
equipment,
labor,
vehicle maintenance.
vehicle maintenance. I don't know of a perfect way to do it. Ideally, you'd only allocate it in one budget, but when you're talking about a school department, one of the things you brought up yesterday was, per pupil costs and comparing to other districts. Well, to do that fairly, you want a fully loaded cost in there, and that's the only way I can think of to get the fully loaded cost for the school. When it's between different town departments, I would lean more towards just pick a department and put it there.
me too. I mean, otherwise, how on earth, we're like hopping back and forth, what, direction do we give to which side of the house? This is the biggest part of our budget, so we spend a lot of time talking with school about it, but the challenge is every year that this is very difficult to manage because of the regulatory requirements that you have and the structural obstacles that you have. We can't provide direction to you in terms of line item changes. We can't do that. We just prove an overall number. And there are certain things that are mandated. You spent a lot of time talking about those services and how important they are. And Chris Cody's done a fantastic job of explaining that and the impact on learning. I mean, I get that completely, but the big theme for me is that it's hard for us to give you direction, on staffing levels, but I think what we're finding is it looks like there are opportunities in terms of staff levels where you have, really, low student teacher ratios. But it's not easy for you folks to deal with that in terms of trying to equalize that, trying to respond to that. So I'm gonna, I understand the problem statement quite well. The issue is it's very difficult for us to get specific feedback on what you should do. In general, I think that, if you want to preserve those staff levels that you're looking for, then there has to be some adjustment overall, because I think the numbers still really don't look a little bit high for what the ECI and CPI numbers suggest both budgets ought to be. And also it looks high for for part of our town that is very likely going to be asking for big capital improvements. So, in a year like that, I would expect that your budget would be as lean as possible and would cut out things that are, you don't have a vehicle now for the school resource officer to use. Isn't there a chance to use a pool vehicle?
So
We're talking about vehicle.
I don't want to get on too much of a tangent. I want to be able to finish. But when it comes to this, I think these items belong in the school's budget.
Yeah,
Whether we want to increase Todd's or community services or police budget for them, because they're already doing these things, that's still a question mark in my head.
Yeah.
But I think recognizing that a service is being provided by community services in the school
Okay.
budget, I think it makes good sense.
And I would just add that it's also, and we've had discussions about this. It truly is a shared service. The use of the fields, depending on the time of year, community programs as well as the school department needs to use and prep and maintain those facilities. So it is truly a collaborative effort.
thanks very
Oh,
much. They can't hear me. That's it. Never heard, my mother never told me.
You'll never recreate it. So let's move on.
So I'm gonna hold my questions rather than interrupting. How about that?
Oh, we
just
can
get to
interrupt
the
a little
point.
bit.
What was fresh in my mind, it's important, I think, for us to understand the challenge and the problem statement, but at the same time, we want to be fair and balanced about feedback, but we do want to give feedback. So I have not forgotten the feedback I got from Superintendent Bruno last night. I'm quite happy to do that in a public setting, but also separately if need be. So yeah, I don't want to lose track of that as, given the opportunity that we have in the meeting today.
Yeah, generally you feel their budget's too high. Is that? Okay.
And I have some other questions that have to do with, it's two things you manage the cost line, but you also, there's a top line aspect to this that has to do with income, with aid that you get, with services that we charge for. I'd like to develop a better understanding of how we do that with our specialized services, especially as they relate to out of district folks that may come to Scarborough for, help with special needs.
Do we have a lot of out of district students that we accommodate in Scarborough?
No.
Okay.
We send Scarborough students, people who reside in Scarborough, to private schools occasionally, but we don't serve students from other districts.
But if I step back for a moment, what I'm hearing, when people, you look at YouTube at the realtor ads for, 3 great reasons to move to Scarborough, almost always they refer to the quality of our schools. Norman said that was a reason why they moved here. There's all kinds of anecdotal data that says that we are known for having good special services.
Yes,
I think that's a great thing.
that's true.
So my question, anyway, there's a question that follows that. If there's a way for us to try to, figure out how to change that from a revenue line, I'd be interested in that.
If they live here, we're required to provide educational services for them. But we don't charge for that service. Other than through your taxes. So, okay, let's
All right.
jump ahead.
As well. So a spreadsheet. Ooh. You guys are really teasing me, I think.
Sorry.
I'm starting to feel it.
These numbers look bigger than yesterday.
Those are the numbers.
That was the first reading.
Oh,
We're just setting it up.
All right, so actually we should go really fast past this one because there's a little more behind this. And again, I know you all have been through this a lot and we've been through this a lot, but I want for the slide deck to be available if somebody's looking at this meeting and, wanting to see what the budget is made up of. This budget pie chart tells you, oh, look, a pie chart, not spreadsheet. Tells you the elements that make up the school department budget and in some sort of largish categories. And the big thing to take away from here is that we are a people organization. You look at the big blue Pac-Man there, and that's salaries, wages, and benefits for school personnel. That's our business. Our business is people to people. And on the next slide, you see a breakdown of who those people are. This one tells you that if you put together the big blue, the slightly smaller Pac-Man and the educational support staff, that's that sort of orangey slice there. I'm not good with colors, but reddish orange. Then you're up to about 80% of our employee population being folks who are actually directly impacting students on a daily basis. So that's really important to us, and it kind of ties into what we were talking about yesterday with the per pupil expenditures. Where are those monies going? If we can do the next one. Here again, a couple of little budget cost drivers. I did spend a little time trying to follow the template that Tom gave to the town departments. I deviated almost immediately, but I threw in a headline here for consistency's sake. Personnel costs, again, 80% of our budget. We have collective bargaining agreements for all but a handful of our staff. So we do engage in collective bargaining and work from employment contracts. At first reading, we had a big increase estimated for health insurance rates, which you remember actually dropped, and that's pretty cool. And main PERS contributions are made for all of our teacher personnel, and they increased their employer share rates this year. And so that actually adds a sizable chunk of money as well to our budget proposal.
So I'd like to pause here if we could. I've spent a lot of time on this in my lifetime and since being here on the council. Year after year, we have a very hard time understanding the total cost associated with these 3-year agreements are recently ratified, right? So they're in year 1 of the contracts. So what was the cost of those? What was the total value of those in terms of, the salary and wage increases and the total package? We've never really been able to get that number. And I know we can get copies of the agreements, but it doesn't really reflect the total cost of the packages and, I have not been able to find that in a line item anywhere. And I even asked, you for additional information on that, I don't know how we would get that. The benefits side of it, I think the health insurance things are fairly easy to isolate, but it would be good to know what those percentages look like by bargaining unit.
So I think if you look at, I'm going to go back to our list of resources that are available on that school budget website, Don. If you look at the FAQ document, which is at the bottom of our list of useful things to look at, I believe the answer to the first question is exactly that. How many FTEs and how many dollars are made up as part of the increase in the budget overall by those bargaining units. It's also, I think, in the budget book. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So this is posted online.
What page is it in the budget book?
This one's not in the budget, but this is our
So
FAQs.
So could you make that available? Could you email that to me?
I just emailed
You
Sue
just-
Hamel. I can share it. That's where that embedded spreadsheet was.
The
at bottom.
FAQs
Yeah.
in there,
Yep.
yeah, that's actually, thank you for doing that. It's actually got a lot of data in it, and it actually arises from the questions that our own finance committee were asking and our own board were asking about just those kinds of things, Don. The other thing about school budget is that, like you said, the line items are hard. We have, over 700 individual GL accounts, and that's because the state and the feds require us to report that way. But in terms of the effects of the bargaining agreements, I think you'll find some data right here that may be what you're looking for.
And so is this what you emailed? So I'll have a look at that and come back to you later with questions. I don't want to take time up now to do it, but
Kate shared it with us, with the finance committee, I think, a month ago, maybe.
Yeah.
So we all got a copy of it.
anyway, let me have a look, let me have a look at it. Thanks. Thanks.
I think on the last page, it answers another one of your questions as well.
So the thing is though, do these also include step increases or are they just gonna base increases on the? Do they include the dollars that are associated with step increases that people get?
The chart that you're looking at right now, Don, is the impact of the increase from FY '23 to FY '24 based on those collective bargaining agreements.
Mhm.
And it's the total dollars including step increases, yes. Presumed step increases because obviously there's turnover involved.
Okay,
And I know you're gonna need a minute to think about that, so please do come back to us with.
Yep.
I just shared it with Liam as well. So if we need to
Great.
refer to something, we can bring it up.
Cool, thanks. You want to go to the next one? All right, so economic realities, budget cost drivers. This is some school impacts and some life impacts. Some of these things are things that everybody is facing. Down at the bottom, the labor market, the inflation impacts on costs and services. Everybody's going to tell you those stories. Not just the school department, but some of the things that are more specific to us are the fact that enrollment is starting to come back, has started to come back, and is projected to continue to grow well beyond where we have been before COVID. And then some of the other things that you've heard about in many different ways from different people, the social emotional needs of students and the learning gaps and the need for academic support. So these are really both general and specific to this. Next slide. In the school capital budget, this is just sort of notes for the layman. What is in our capital budget? And we have three separate sections: technology and facilities and transportation. And actually, I noticed that I have an error in this slide because we are not paying for the transportation management software this year. Next year, we paid for it this year. There won't be an implementation cost again next year.
Can eliminate a bullet.
Take that bullet out.
Is there a dollar amount associated with the bullet?
Not in the FY '24 budget. That would be good though, right?
It would be.
Feels good though.
Just
So-
cut that.
what about this thing on transportation? I know we go over this over and over again about, buying, if we buy 3 buses or really buy 4 of them, if we capitalize them, what about the idea of not going to bond it, not going to capital this year because of the various reasons and just trying to, buy it out of, as an expenditure, not through, not deal with additional interest expense. Now, because this is really the time to start doing stuff like this.
So that kind of goes to some of my questions that have to do with use of fund balance, that have to do with appropriations versus bonding, and it is a really good question. I mean, I would love to see those buses be in our operating budget, but when we do that, then we're talking about, or not in the budget, but appropriated, right? Accounted for through tax dollars.
Yeah.
But then we come up against the pressure of the school budget tax ask going up. So it's really, I mean, it's really a great question.
Well, yeah, I would say, we go back and forth on this. What's the biggest driver of the tax increase? And, there's, a debate that will go on for a long time about which is going to have a bigger impact. And right now, our assumption is that our model, our deficit spending model, our heavy reliance on capital actually is a good thing because, much of that we believe over time will come from TIF districts where we can shelter income, but in actual fact, in the first 5 years, this is our 5th year of being, under a TIF. It will, we're just barely starting to see the number in the black for the town, 1.3 million, Tom, what is it, something like that, that we believe we can use in terms of captured value.
It's approaching 3 million in total
Total.
between the two different major TIP districts.
Okay,
We're capturing all of the value in the TIF district.
Right.
Portion goes back to the developer. The
Right.
rest can be used for
Right.
authorized or approved projects.
and I understand that this will
School
accelerate.
buses would not be one of those projects that we could use it for. I don't have a better time to pivot to this, and I'm interested in it as well, though. So one of the dilemmas that I've been dealing with, it's the same point that I think you're trying to make, Don, is they're giving, right now, the school department is giving us 1.6 million back.
Mhm.
They're giving that to the taxpayer because
Yeah.
we didn't spend all the money that we had approved for them over the past couple of years. So they do that consistently, right? It's either $1 million, $1.5 million. They've been doing it for a long time. What I'm trying to reconcile is they're giving us back $1.5 million so that we can then go out to the bond market and borrow $1.5 million for capital items. And some of these capital items are recurring, they're regular, they happen all the time. So how do you, so to your point, we're paying for 4 buses, we get in 3. We're doing that on a regular basis. How do we pivot? And we can't force them to give the money back to us. There's state law that, if the surplus got too big, they would have to. But we can say we're not going to bond the buses.
Yeah,
Or we're not going to bond maybe some of the regular, other recurring maintenance items.
or we could do what we've done a year or two, the past couple of years, or we had 1 year where we didn't have any major capital, projects, capital investments that were approved. Or we say we take a category of equipment, say vehicles, all vehicles, except for the ones that are in dire need of replacement. We're going to freeze for a year. We're going to hold it. We're not going to either capitalize or spend from expenditures cash to buy vehicles. Zip. You draw the line across it.
So I'm not trying to.
Anyway, I'm not-
Not buy any new vehicles. I'm just
saying, we have to, as a town, to start to take a broader view of stuff like that, that where we have some flexibility and we've had a practice that we should really scrutinize in view of some of the soft things that we need here in terms of skills and educational needs, and I know we have the looming capital, associated with a new school. But there are other areas where I think we really need to look across the category. So I'm really not picking on the school on this. I'm just saying it would help us to take a hard look at that and to do something totally different. So,
It's interesting too, because I've seen us try to put buses into operating, right? There were a couple of years where we managed to get in our operating budget. It's a recurring cost. We're going to do it, and I know there's a distinction between capital that's appropriated, which is actually probably a better place to do that. But my point being that when push comes to shove, you've got $100,000 item or a $300,000 item that when we're starting to look around for ways to shave the tax rate, we say, oh, we could bond those, right? And so those are decisions that have been made in the past. They're decisions that we continue to look at. I would like nothing more myself than to take our existing fund balance and put it all into capital reserve and use it for that. But if I did that, if I took that, I have to ask you about the 1.6. That's one of my questions, because I think I have 1.5020.
I think there was some from adult ed and maybe food service. I don't know. I got a total of 1.6, but I can double check it.
Double check it, because it's 1.5 in general fund and 20,000 in adult ed, and there's nothing in fund balance used in food service.
So double check it.
Check your accounts, because I know we have a spread.
I may be calling something
We have a
unbalanced that
spreadsheet.
is not. Yes.
We have a spreadsheet. I'll look at it with you if you want. But with all that said, if we took the 1.5 million out of our operating budget, we'd be back to a 7.8% tax increase, an increase on our tax request. So it's got to come from somewhere.
Yes.
And, the fund balance thing, not to go off on a wild tangent, but you said it, there's a statutory requirement for a school department, if they raise local taxes and they have a surplus at the end of the year, there's only certain ways that you can use that surplus. We can't say, oh gosh, I think we need a new something that we haven't thought of. It can only be used as revenue in an ensuing budget year or as to fund capital reserves, which is, you know, a great use of those monies. But the idea being that if we, in a sense, overtax people in our community in one year, then that money just doesn't evaporate. That money goes towards giving money back to those taxpayers, those same taxpayers in the following year or years. Yeah, I mean, it's really, for me, it's the appetite of the community to pay more money in taxes now in order to conserve funds to have available for those capital expenses in the future.
At the end of the day, you're saving money. But it's a
Because
little
you're not
pain,
paying
it
that.
creates a little bit of pain up front.
But you're not paying that.
Interest, and interest is, it's gonna be significant, I think, this year. Counselor
Yes, sir.
Seibert.
Good, the conversation brought itself around.
Okay,
Thank you.
But the pain is felt in that first transition year.
yeah, first year or two. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've all seen the moments when we get that pinch point where we're trying to reach a certain target. And there are these big ticket items that we're saying we're going to appropriate, and we'll say, oh, you know, and to Don's point, we can just not buy them. But if we do need them and we need to pay for them somehow, it's become, you know, I won't say easy, but it's become a decision to bond instead. Especially with the interest rates being so low.
Right.
You know, it's and at certain points, we were like money ahead to bond almost.
Yeah, with bond premium, we were. Yeah,
Exactly,
they're like
exactly,
paying us to go to the market.
exactly.
Well, I could say that the feedback that I'm currently receiving from counselors is more about what are we doing to prepare for the future than what's the impact going to be this year. So there might be appetite to experience a little pain this year if we know it's setting us up on a better foot going forward.
The other thing I would say about that is that it's in my mind, and I certainly have been turned topsy-turvy over the past few years with COVID and the federal funds. I don't think we're going to be seeing you know, $2 million surpluses every school year, right? So I'm still cognizant of the fact that we have $1.5 million in our budget in FY23 right now as revenue. And we have it in the same level as that for next year. We know we have those monies now, but if we wanted to step that down because we didn't think we were going to generate that much surplus year over year on a consistent basis, then we'd be creating a gap there. So we have to think about that.
The pain's gonna come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless. Okay.
Just a dull pain, an ache.
Well, and to Don's point, maybe to help ease the transition instead of, like, you can, when you do it through a capital account, right, you're gonna have a fund there. Maybe you can time or stagger your purchases a little bit. That can help ease some of that pain. Because you don't really need to get 3 on the same day, right? Or maybe you do.
Well, the 3 buses a year is because we have 30 buses and the recommended lifespan of the bus is 10 years and the way that we use them.
Yeah.
After 10 years, there's some issues. You can't insure them for full replacement cost after 10 years with most insurance policies. And then of course, maintenance becomes more expensive. So that's just, you know, that's a recommendation, but we've certainly put them off sometimes or put 1 off or bought 2 instead of 3. And it's always a topic of discussion.
If you buy one every 4 months, 5 months, would that keep you close enough?
What benefit does that bring?
Cash flow.
Depends on how the 5 months fall, right? Like you're
You
saying,
want them
like,
for the beginning of the school
you're
years when you
saying
try to
we're-
time them?
well, it's, you know, that's a whole nother topic. You could send me down a big rabbit hole with that one because the production schedules for buses has been insane. We're actually picking up 2 buses like right now that we ordered last July.
Okay. It's
So
about a year.
that's, you know, for your cash flow, we still have the money. I think I cut the check last week though.
But for that, we haven't issued the bonds yet. Is what I
We won't
suspect.
issue bonds until after the expenditures happen, so that would be part of that thought
Okay.
process. Yeah,
I think we brought out the issues associated with it anyways, and I'm looking at the school board finance committee as well to see if there's any appetite there It's one of those things we know that at the end of the day, it saves taxpayer money, costs them a little more today.
Yeah. And I think we really look to you folks to say, you know, yes, we'd like to do that. In terms of being able to afford more through tax dollars in the current moment than what we've got on the table right now.
Yeah.
And we also do have, you know, our board has fully committed to continuing to build the capital reserve fund with any excess surplus that we may have at the end of any year. Because we're, you know, aware that that's going to be a huge asset for the school department and the community as a whole. But in terms of, you know, making that commitment in the budget as you're building it, we can't actually budget for, I guess you'd say, excess funds to put into a reserve account. That's not the way school operating budgets work. But year-end surplus, we certainly can, and funding strategically upfront, we can do that.
How much do you have in the reserve today, you know?
In the capital reserve?
Yeah.
400 and change.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 600, we put 600 in as of the close of FY '22, and we've 199 that's allocated to this year's capital budget.
And in the current proposal, I don't believe any of that 4 is proposed to be used.
No, we didn't deliberately did not choose to ask for those reserve funds to be used because of the upcoming school project.
Mhm.
Because, you know, assuming that what we have there now and what we can add to it this year would be beneficial and
And you're gonna need them for some of the design costs associated with that project as well, right? Or just,
I think there's a balance between the reserve account and then what we would budget for the project as a whole. That could be bonded. Once you have a project that's approved and you actually have construction imminent, you can bond those funds. You can't bond funds for long range. You can't bond funds until you have some tangible asset. Because the bond market is looking for a tangible asset, which is ultimately the building, but you can fold design costs into bonding.
In which case we'd essentially be paying ourselves back for monies already invested in the soft cost.
Yeah.
if you will,
So,
Which could go back to a capital reserve.
right.
frankly.
So I recall that you zero out your fund balance. You take it to zero, your unassigned fund balance?
No.
No, so,
What we have been doing in past couple of years is using what we know we have from the prior year to the year in which we're developing the budget. So to be specific, what we had in the bank as of the end of FY '22, we thought forward and said, okay, we'll use that in FY '24. Right, so we're not banking on generating an amount of surplus in this current year.
Yeah.
But in effect, we know that we will, and so we'll use that in the next year, sort of a leapfrog thing.
but their fund balances are separate from ours. I mean, they don't roll up into one.
Yes.
it rolls up into the total, but it's
Right.
considered restricted.
Right. So, I mean, one thing I was gonna say, I mean, every time we talk about budgets, particularly on the school side, you know, I keep going back to this point, are the number of structural obstacles that are there to really influence the budget. I mean, the costs that we're looking at now, you know, that are associated with the contracts, the 5.7% or so. I mean, that number is pretty much sunk. There's not much we can do about that to influence that, you know, over the next several years, other than, you know, managing headcount, not replacing people after, you know, after retirements, death leaves, others, that kind of thing. So there are relatively few levers other than to try to think differently about how we spend money and how, you know, and I think that's why we keep coming back to some of the capital items and some of the things having to do with equipment and facilities and services.
How's your attrition been? How's your attrition been? Your turnover, retirements, is it?
This year, it's very light.
Okay.
And I think, you know, it's the pandemic impact. Last year, it was pretty heavy because we'd gotten through some pretty tough years and folks who were eligible to retire were just hired. This year, we only have a handful of people who'll be retiring. Usually there's a handful of people who resign for other reasons. move away, take other jobs.
So when that happens, do you ever consolidate positions, not replace them as they, after people leave them, think differently about it?
Depends on the needs of the students and the numbers that we have, and the position of the person that's leaving.
Right.
Surely, yes, we have done that. And that's one of the things that you'll find linked into this FAQ that you're gonna be spending all your time with. There's a couple of charts in there that talk about positions that weren't filled or positions that were traded for other positions. Which I think might be helpful.
Now, you've been beating your budget, particularly for wages and benefits. Why? Do you know, have you not been able to fill positions or?
That's exactly it, yeah. Support staff has been very difficult, particularly, we have, I think, currently 5 open custodial positions across the district. We have 6 open food service positions across the district. Of course, the ed techs, I think you've heard about, we have an enormous amount of difficulty filling special education ed tech positions particularly. So yes, it's positions going unfilled, and I think, from what I've heard, that's been true in the town as well, where there've been a lot of open positions that we just haven't been able to fill. And I think, I think I heard you say last night, John, that it would be interesting to think about making that assumption and maybe reducing our budget by saying, oh, we're never going to fill these positions, or we might not fill all of them.
But then when you do, there's a catch up. So it might be more of a top level. I've been thinking through this one as well.
Yeah,
I don't know if it belongs in your budget, but somewheres we might be able to account for that dynamic.
for that dynamic. Well, I will say that we do budget turnover projection for folks that we know are leaving at the very high end of the scale, the retirees. We budget a little breakage, or whatever you want to call it, turnover calculation. But in terms of budgeting on the sad assumption that we won't fill a position, that's a little dangerous for us, because schools can't pivot on their spending after the budget referendum is passed. We're capped at what we can spend. So if I said, well, gee, if I can fill all these positions, that'll be great. I'll just go back and get some more money to do that, or pay for them, because I've cut my budget down below what I need. That's problematic. And I think, to go back to what we were just saying, I think that's why the statute is clear on what happens with surplus, because you have to budget for your, I call it your best case scenario, right? And then if you do have surplus, there's a mechanism for that to turn back over to the town.
And on the town side, undoubtedly, there is, things happen over the course of the year that aren't exactly what we planned. But that's one of the only ways that we can build fund balance, frankly. So there's a trade-off.
Can I ask a question about the open positions? Is it more that there just isn't staff in the state, or do you feel like your salaries are not as competitive as to the people surrounding us?
It's interesting. That's a really good question, because I think in relative terms, we're probably better off than a lot of other communities, but when there's a shortage everywhere, everyone's going to feel it. It just exacerbates it. Right. And so settling, our new educator support person, like settling contracts too, and becoming more competitive, which was, the goal, certainly one of the main goals of our negotiating committees, has definitely helped. We're not, as Kate mentioned, we still have open positions, and positions that need to be filled and haven't, and have had to get creative as a result of that. But it could be worse, significantly worse. And some of that is just particularly at the, at the positions that are at the support level. They're just, there's limited people out there, and there's a lot of jobs.
So I recall that issue, and not in this most recent 3-year negotiating cycle, but the one prior to that, where there was data that was made available that suggested we had fallen, in terms of our competitiveness in the market. So I thought we addressed that 6 years ago. So it's still an issue now after this last round of increases that, look pretty healthy compared to ECI and
In terms of what we have to offer in our collective bargaining agreements and our compensation packages, I think we're in very good shape. Apart from, I would say, special education ed techs, I think that's an area where a lot of districts are looking at their compensation for those specific jobs. But, you know, these bargaining agreements have been looking at that, at those regional numbers.
Yeah.
Would you say there's any other areas where we're deficient at this point?
I would say one thing that we have broached is particularly with special education, educational technicians is a differential based on role. There are some jobs that are just not created equal in terms of their difficulty. What we're asking are, of our support personnel in terms of student need, individualized need, and those kind of things. So we've talked some about that too, is, looking at differentiating in terms of compensation based on role within the educational technician contract.
I think to go back to what Karen was saying, though, I think, it's really the market is just crazy
Hard.
right now. We've put out an ad for a teaching job, which, in the good old days, you'd get 50 applicants, and now we're getting 5. And it's across all of our categories of staff, and I think Tom will say it's across all of the specialized categories of staff that the town has overall.
One thing that Heather Perry and Gorham and some other superintendents have done too, and what we were on board with it as well, as partnering with USM to get people in the pipeline into education. First is educational technician, and eventually having coursework paid for so that ultimately you're certified to become Ed Tech 3 and then teacher. And so trying to get a pipeline of people into education as well to address some of these things by also marrying it with free post-secondary education and training and certification, those kind of things. And so we've started that to partner with that as well, just looking at other ways to kind of get folks into education.
That's good to hear, because I haven't done much research on this, but my sense is that when you're new as a teacher, it's hard to find a spot. There's not a great feeder system or development program or system. I think some of the bigger districts like us really need to be part of the solution with that. And sounds like you're already on it.
Yeah, and I would say we're in a better spot, I think in part to Don's point, there's been a lot of work over the last 6-7 years to make our professional folks competitive in the marketplace, very much so. And so we are hiring really qualified, experienced, talented teachers, who aren't just right out of, not in their first year, second. I mean, some are in their stars, and that's great, but we hire a lot of people that have experience already and bring that with them and come to Scarborough for, because we pay them well, and we're a strong district. A lot of good colleagues to work with, so it's attractive. That's been
Other
good.
questions?
I have lots of questions. I'm not sure.
Do we have any
Do
more?
you have other slides you want to cover? And
Let's just sort of flip through and see. This is just a summary of the capital budget, which
which we're going to delve into as a
exactly, you guys
council,
are
I
going
believe,
into
right?
that again later on. So we could skip these next two, Liam and C. This is a sort of bullet point version of what you have in front of you in this fancy candy colored spreadsheet. The changes between first reading of the school board, which was that first slide with the big ugly numbers on it, and second reading. We're not at second reading yet. That'll be in another 2 weeks. And so things may continue to wiggle. But this is just capturing some of the big ticket items that have changed. Anthem premium rates was a great savings. We have, of course, the new additional subsidy that was calculated by the state that was brought into us. I'll leave you with this little sort of get your magnifying glass out detailed chart so you can see where all the bits and pieces are that add up to these. But this is what the board will be taking a look at when they take action for their second reading. And it's kind of like the same process that you guys go through where you summarize the different changes that you want to see to the budget orders.
Can you explain the offset? I know this is, great news when you get these serendipitous things where you get, increased state funding. So there's, 1.6 million that came. But then there was an offset for pre-K. Can you explain the offset for that?
Yeah, so we found that out last week, a little disappointing, but in the magic EPS formula that we talked about, there was a calculation that assumed that Scarborough would have pre-K students enrolled. And that was based on a conversation that we'd been having with Shooting Stars here in town and working on a partnership and collaboration with them. And the fact is that we're still working on a partnership and collaboration with them. But in the current model where we are today, the proposal is not to have those kids enrolled in Scarborough schools, which means they're not counted by the Department of Education, which means that the monies that they had allocated to us for that purpose were then withdrawn. So we went up and then we went down again.
So this whole pre-K topic, I know we've talked a lot about it, but I'd like to make a request that, I know it's not included in a lot of our, I'm jumping around here a little bit, in our building capacity calculations, but can we somehow at least not lose sight of that and have that at least in a footnote so we're not forgetting about it? And I know our plans are not really to provide it, but can we, I just have a funny feeling that that's gonna, and I don't have a crystal ball, but that at some point could become a requirement, right? A federal or state requirement. So can we at least just have that in a footnote someplace so we don't forget about it? Because I just have a funny feeling that's.
Well, and this is new to me. I didn't know that we were trying to work a partnership. So is that if somebody wanted their child to attend pre-K, we would have a relationship with Shooting Stars and subsidize the costs, or?
The current conversation is around CDS children who are identified before starting K-12 school with disabilities. And so that's Child Development Services.
Okay.
Other,
Thank you.
you know that
You
one?
saw my quizzical look there where they.
I know what that one stands for.
Thanks.
So Child Development Services and the Department of Education have been in conversations for years about the fact that it's difficult to have special services provided in pre-K settings. And so there's been this sort of talk about, well, the school should take that over. The schools should all run pre-Ks and they should all have special services. That's not happened yet in terms of a mandate, but you're right, Don, it's been on the table.
Or years.
Yeah, and I'm really open and flexible with how we do it, if it's a public-private partnership or we want to get creative about it, but I think it's going to be a need state that, it's going to be real.
Yeah.
Well, and if that were to happen, that's the very reason why we're looking at this partnership, because this program in particular is kind of an ideal model and has been for years for our kids who ultimately will come into kindergarten with an IEP, have already been receiving CDS services, but have done so in a classroom environment already. And so if that were to close or no longer be available, then you would have students that are hitting our doors in kindergarten having zero kind of classroom experience or school-like experience, so to speak. And that's a rough transition, in particular for kids who are receiving some pretty significant services.
Good point.
And I would say, John, to answer your question a little more thoroughly, we don't have an agreement yet. We're still working on it.
Mhm.
It will go before the board at the point when we actually have something to talk about that has real details. But the idea would be that Scarborough would help them with hiring, training, and supervision of special services staff. And those would be fully reimbursed by CDS. But because those staff members would have access to more of the Scarborough schools, professional development and training and benefits and so forth, it would be more attractive for them to hire than it currently is, where the pre-K reimbursement model for CDS is limited and they make less money and they have fewer supports.
And the state apparently is willing to kick in towards that type of arrangement or,
So I thought there was pending legislation that CDS wants to stop treating 3 through 5-year-olds and put that on the town. Am I misspeaking? Is that what we're talking about?
That is what we're talking about
And
here.
Right.
when we
And
talk about preparing for the future and we talk about cutting a budget for a school department that might now have to provide special ed services to 3 to 5-year-olds. We talk about preparing for the future. I understand that town council has a goal for keeping the tax rate stable. I'm having a really hard time saying that let's, not increase all of our departments when our population is growing so much and cut services when these departments are growing at such a rate. And so I think when we talk again about preparing for the future, this is happening. I have friends who work for CDS. It's scary how behind they are and how much they cannot meet the needs of these kids who really need services. And so I really much struggle with this, and I look at your budget and I see you guys making compromises that make me uncomfortable as a parent and as a resident, and I feel awful that you guys are forced to make these decisions all the time. So I will politely disagree with Mr. Hamel. I think I'm having a hard time diving in and looking where you guys could cut. I think you're making cuts that are not in the best interest of our students. One of the questions that I had was, I know I see in the news that a lot of budgets are going up around us, and I'm curious as to what the budgets look like in the towns around us right this year. Are their school budgets increasing substantially?
Yes, and I would say the impact, and I'm getting this from the newspapers just like you are, so I do have some listservs and things of people that I read, but I would say that in fact, the impacts to the towns and the tax rates in other towns around us have been much more significant than what we're looking at. So in many ways, we're lucky.
I just like to clarify my position, Councilor Shoup has characterized it. I don't think I propose cutting any services. What I've said is, I think we need to look hard at areas that involve other things like equipment and vehicles and things like that. That's what I'm talking about. So the sort of services that we're talking about here that they want to keep, I'm trying to suggest that we look at ways to mitigate the expenses for those by being, careful with how we look at the deploying staff where we can and taking a hard look at things that we've done in the past that we may not have to do that involve equipment. And I know there's a whole nother conversation about facilities and, separate that from what we're talking about.
So if you take out the expense of the capital improvement of a consolidated school, do you feel like your expenses, I mean, I generally would feel like if you're bringing everyone together, do you feel like your expenses would go down when you suddenly have everyone under the same roof? I mean, when I was looking at the cost per student last night, what really I wonder is how much of that cost per student is maintaining these facilities that we have right now that are just expensive.
That is a portion.
And so I think that's kind of one of the questions I had was, well, of course our costs are high because we're spread thin between 3 different schools. And one of the questions that I had, and my kids went to Blue Point, and we were with Kelly Mullen Martin, and she spoke to some of the rumors that I've been hearing about, and I'm surprised that the school building steering committee hasn't brought more attention to it. And I'm not quite sure how sensitive we can be about it, about the health conditions in these schools. And I'm wondering if you're incurring expenses due to these health problems. If a teacher is sitting in a room filled with mold 8-9 hours a day, are they getting sick? Are we having, or do we have students with asthma problems? And so I think these are the things that are going through my mind. I'm not sure. I think this is more of a rant. I'm not sure if there's a question there, but I think, are you guys incurring expenses? In my mind, okay, I had a case that was a sick building syndrome. Do you have people getting sick? People out on comp? Are you incurring expenses beyond just that?
I can say pretty definitively that there's no health concern, like environmental health concerns in those schools. There's definitely inconvenience. There's definitely patching together. There's definitely sometimes the water lets go from the ceiling. But in terms of like indoor air quality, mold, those kinds of things, we do extensive testing. We make sure that those environments are clean and safe, and we really have not had that kind of problem in those buildings. You know, that's not to say that they're adequate. It's not to say that they're efficient, because they're not. But I think that's not necessarily part of the narrative that we want to share, because we're not having people whose health is being compromised in those.
And I wasn't around with Wentworth, but my understanding was there was major issues going on at Wentworth that sort of.
Wentworth had all
and-
kinds of fun things. Wentworth had radon and asbestos.
Yeah.
And no eggs.
That's a new school.
Oh, no, no.
No.
Please.
The old one.
thank
was- Sorry.
No, it was affecting those potential or suspected health crises that really brought that to a head and
That really
they
pushed. yeah,
pushed that
pushed
project
that.
forward and it approved.
Now, I won't say there's no mold at Blue Point School, because you know, we all live in the marsh, right? So, you know, there's mold in my house too, but we do have a very careful approach to any kind of toxic environmental hazard, and we do test all the schools regularly, spot test. And we have a sort of a hazmat company that will come in and check for us if there's anything that we see that looks out of line.
Is testing normal, or is this something you're doing because of the age of the facility?
I would say it's something we're doing because it's Scarborough and because we're damp and because mold is a factor everywhere here. But you know, I will say that those facilities are less easy to keep clean, and they're less easy to keep dry, and they're less easy to insulate. right?
Well,
So-
yeah.
So that is a factor for sure.
And we're fortunate we have such effective facilities maintenance. And then also just to add, I mean, the portables and the temporary. I mean, they're at the end of their life. I mean. Very just at the end of their life. And so that's obviously a contributing factor, but a little bit of a preview for the business case. I mean, having everyone under one roof, K-3. Has just had massive advantages operationally. As well as educationally, for a whole host of really powerful reasons. And so it's very rare when you get in a situation, particularly in education, where the solution is cheaper and better and provides the equity that we need for all students. And I mean, there's so many benefits to it, on top of being, you know, if you project out cost, just wildly more efficient and cheaper in the long run and better. I mean, all the above.
And as we were just saying, I mean, people are moving here because of the quality education. And we want to continue to provide that
We do.
in a safe.
It was, it's funny, you just prompted me to think that we actually had a huge increase in enrollment at the Wentworth level. When the new Wentworth School opened, there was a significant bump in enrollments because of that school, because people, you know, figuring out where they were going to move to and be like, oh, look at that brand new, beautiful, shiny building over there. Go there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that same kind of impact with a brand new shiny K.
Could I just ask a question on this slide and also here? Why is it that the 1.5 million, the first bullet, is shown here? My recollection is it came in the day before we scrambled, made changes, and the budget we presented included it.
Yes, and I'm sorry, that's confusing. The school board didn't have that at their first reading. So
okay.
these are changes that the top of
Good.
your chart there is what the school board voted on in first reading. And so everything in the middle
Sure.
is reflected there, even though we already did know that when you
Okay,
made
thank you.
the presentation. So the town's charts are a little bit different.
I told the commissioner to get that number out before the presentation.
The night
Good work.
before, yeah.
He timed that
I made it go better.
Yeah.
So the next slide is the bottom of the chart. The same thing that you have in front of you, and it's really just showing the impact of those changes so far.
Well, kudos to you for moving in the right direction. Thank you.
I did it all by myself.
Good work, Dave.
You're welcome. I think there's not much else on there. I think there might be a couple more slides, Liam. Oh, yeah, this is where I was trying to be a good person and actually follow the template. And there is a link in here that I think will be active when folks are looking at the slide deck. There's a little chart in there that talks about what the school's net budget has been over the last 10 years. And then what the tax rate has been. And obviously, you know, there are a lot of pieces of math in between those two lines. There's the school budget combined with the town budget, and this doesn't include capital. This is just the operating funds. But the point of it is to say that we feel like we're on a trajectory to help the town achieve the goal of the tax rate increase based on the numbers that we've seen in the past and where they've landed. So that's what that's about.
I like when you link things in your presentation. You can always dig deeper. Right?
I seem to just look at things all the time these days. I'm like,
And there's a link at the end of your presentation as well, which is included it's on the town website on the calendar as part of the agenda.
yeah, do you want to go back to the slide, Liam, and we'll see, what have you put in there?
It's
Oh,
to your
yeah, good,
budget
good.
for your
Yeah.
page.
And the cool thing about the Googles is that all these things stay live. So if you click on them, I think you can get there right from the presentations. So we've got the financial management goal. We've got the strategic capital and facilities planning goal, obviously. Big partnership going on here in terms of the unified school project. And then I know public engagement and communications is really important to our board as well, making sure that we're trying to get as much information as we can out there to the public and answering questions. And I know you have your FAQ going, and we've got one that's specific to the schools, and some of that process over. So on the last slide, I think is the list of all the many zillions of things that you can find on the schools budget portal. Of course, the school's budget is incorporated on the town side on the budget page as well, but this way, this lets us put a few more things up there that are specific to the school and not clutter up the municipal side of the website. And that last item that's on this little chart is the FAQ that we were talking about earlier that I think you have a copy of now, Donna, and there's more links in that. You can just click all day.
So I wanted to, I'm happy that you guys joined us. I wanted to give you guys a chance to, I'm looking at the school board finance committee. Comments, perceptions. Are you guys comfortable with where you're at with the budget? Are there opportunities or deficiencies that we should know about? How's your review gone? Anything. Oh, I give you an opportunity to talk.
It's been interesting for me to hear your questions and comments, and one of my biggest takeaways is there something we can do with, so what you guys have been talking about with funding some, whether it's capital purchases through the regular budget process, and you know, 3 levers are really taxes, we get gas and service. Kate and I had lots of conversations about gas and service. You know, just with not filling positions or employee turnover and things like that, and trying to, can we utilize those savings that maybe we can't budget for, but utilize those savings in addition to fund balance to kind of using those 3 levers to maybe start down the road of whether it's buying a bus, half a bus, you know, through revenue. So
I hear you fine.
I've got a cold. Same allergies. So between that, and we have a meeting on Monday. As what Dawn was saying as well, there's just, we've gotten some information just like we have, and you need to digest things. A little bit more on Monday.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Very helpful. The additional information has been great too, the FAQs and everything. Thank you.
Go ahead, Freyla.
There's no we.
Somebody had to ask the questions, right?
So I have 2 questions, and they're kind of like wildly disparate. First of all, So like, I think one of the wonders and what I would like to look at Monday, for our audience, would be to, looking at that revenue line, which is really our unexpended, I'm not the number person. That the extra money that was unspent revenue that we're now sending back to the town, what would that break down look like? Like, what would that impact be on the bottom line tax number? And then the percentage is at the bottom of the spreadsheet, which I look to understand what's going on. What would that look like? What impact would that have? And if the town number does have an appetite and wants to push us over into funding capital, that's discussion Carol and I have had, I think, both times now. We both are very interested in building the capital structure. We don't like bonding out. I think with the way interest rates are going, it makes sense to sort of look at that right now and not in a few years when the interest rates have gotten even higher. If that is the way that things continue to go. That was like my one sort of thing, and I think on Monday. On the other hand, Kim also said this, it looks like an arbitrary percentage of 5%. And this, I brought this up at every budget meeting because yeah, I'm not a details person of big picture. We set this target, it looks somewhat arbitrary to me that we're attempting a 5% increase when inflation has been higher than that all year. Why 5%?
It's a little bit arbitrary. I mean, it's based on history. But where we find ourselves today is not the pattern we've been in for recent history. So it was a start was trying to not just focus on the mill rate change. And I don't know that we got it right. I mean, honestly, the gross budget that we adopted last night was lower than last year. So you can look at the 5% in through a lot of different lenses. But yeah, so it's not magic.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely more art than science. But it's worked well for us in the past. The challenge will be our ability to maintain that in view of what we're looking at, particularly, major capital expenditures. So we just need to think of other ways to prepare for that. And it just, it's like, battening down the hatches before the tornado comes. I mean, it's just trying to get as tight as we can with our cost structure and as tight as we can with spending that is discretionary, that may not be essential. And in order to make room for the stuff that's really important. And I think you've done an outstanding job of reminding us what that is. And I said this in the budget meetings earlier, I think the schools have done a miraculous job of keeping pace with all of the demands that you've had in terms of the disruption from COVID and kids not being in school. I think it really is heroic. And but we really don't want to have to rely on heroics, we really don't. So and this is a giant monkey puzzle we're all trying to solve here. And it's just going to take everybody's creativity and I think willingness to sort of challenge one another on numbers and assumptions, in a respectful way, so we can get at a better understanding of what we're really dealing with. And I think we're positioned well for that. I think we, by the efforts we've taken to include transparency and engagement of people and leveraging committees and that sort of thing, we got a lot of smart people, more and more working on it now than we ever had. And I'm hopeful that will lead to a successful outcome for everybody.
Just don't want to make a quick point. We're here talking about the expending side of the equation. What are our priorities, what's going to cost. The other side of the equation that's made I'll say our tax rate predictable and manageable is the growth in our valuation year to year. That's given us additional ability to spend more to meet the needs. So that's not within your control. That's not what you're talking about tonight, but that's the other determinant of your tax rate is how much we're valued at. And so historically, we've been enjoying a predictable, healthy level of growth year over year. The last couple of years, John and I have talked about it, are probably, I think, are unsustainable going forward. We're approaching 3%, where historically 2% is kind of the more comfortable, and that still provides for some pretty healthy growth.
But the other piece of the equation that I think we're going to start seeing more of next year is how we handle our growth. So directing it towards TIF districts comes back to us in the form of the subsidy that you guys get from the state. I think next year will be the first year that we actually start to see that trickle into the funding formula. So I don't think we're at a huge risk of losing school, state funding, which we've been in that position before. Our enrollment's starting to trend up and so those are good things, right? Right now, our revenue is growing faster than our expenses. When you're in that position, it makes things a little easier to adapt to. At some point, it might go the other way, but I don't see that in the immediate future.
Yeah, I would say over the last year and a half or two, this council and council before has made some really thoughtful decisions that have set us up well. And as John says, I think the performance of the TIF districts are going to be a real important part of how we're able to manage things going forward.
The trick to all of that, I think, also will be to us ensure that we're keeping an eye to what the real impact is. I think we have not, we're not as sophisticated in our calculation of that as I think we need to be. And we've called that out and we're working on it, working on really trying to get a handle on impact fees, the true cost of development, what the real value is associated with development. And I think it's easier for developers to point to the value they're getting than it is for the town. Our story is a little more complicated. So.
April? You're good. I actually don't know if we have any members of the public with us, but I think I can figure it out. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on anything that we talked about? Sorry, did you have any other questions, Karen?
5:26.
You good? Okay, I see I have a raised hand. Marvin, bear with me for 1 second. I just need to figure out how to get there. Okay. All right, Mr. Gates, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
Thank you, Councilor Clucci. Quick question, really interesting discussion, high level and low level. And I was having a hard time hearing Councilor Hamel at some point, and I'm not 100% sure if you asked this specific question, but there was a lot of conversation around cost per student, cost per special ed student, cost even per ESL student, and state revenue that offsets some of the additional costs, for example, for special ed students. I've been, while listening to the last half of the conversation, searching the school's website, the frequently asked questions. I can't find the details of what the cost is per student. For example, what the cost per special ed is per student and what the state offset is per student. Can you help me, or otherwise offline help me access that information, please? Thank you.
Yes, what I think I can do is send a link to the ED 279 report, which has the state funding piece of that, and then also the frequently asked questions that Kate shared with us that has a whole bunch of other information. I think that's most of what we were referring to.
I think that the only way that you can really get directly to special education apart from the 279, which is a little complicated, is maybe if you looked at the per pupil costs by category on the second tab of that, where it does call out the special education department. It's not necessarily a cost per special education student, right? It's a cost for the district for the special education services that are provided. So it's not exactly the same formula that I think Mr. Gates is looking for, but he could get closer there.
And Kate, I just want to be clear. I think what I heard you say last night, and I haven't had the time to look at that link, but that is a link to showing our cost per student with the relative breakdown as compared to our cohort
Other
that you
districts in
selected.
this-
So it's not
in this region.
statewide, it's selected. And I know you've got a whole methodology and rationale as to why you selected those districts over others.
Yeah, they're local neighbor districts with similar programming, and also the state averages on there just as a comparison as well. But again, the data for every school district in the state is available if anybody wants to look at that. That's on
You
the
pulled the
DOE's website.
cohorts from that larger list, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, the DOE has a lot of good information on their website too.
And they do it year over year. So I took that and put it into a 10-year chart or however many years.
So Marvin,
If
we
you
will.
can still hear me, thank you.
Yep, we can. Go ahead.
No, I didn't know, but thank you again.
Sure.
Hey, can I ask one more question? I just,
No, we're done.
Mervin's, no
Go
time.
ahead.
I promise I won't ask anymore. Have you ever had any experience with redeploying teachers, like reassigning them? I mean, I'm not proposing that, but,
Yeah.
and does it work or is it a crazy idea or hope we never do it again? I mean, what's,
Well, I answer yes, because we have given teachers different assignments if the need for their current role has diminished or disappeared and there's a new role that they can fill. Teachers are certified for specific skills, for lack of a better word. So you can't necessarily say, oh, second grade teacher, I need you to go teach high school science. But we move teachers and support staff all the time into different assignments depending on the needs of the students,
great, thanks,
particularly in special education.
thank you.
Okay, seeing no other public comment. Any other? Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Tell Marvin that the schools were frequently asked.
Okay, thank you.
So he has that.
Well,
If you want to send him